crises in the national security of this country. Vice President Dick Cheney was defense secretary during the Persian Gulf War. Donald Rumsfeld served as defense secretary before and also as White House chief of staff. Condoleezza Rice has been on the staff of the National Security Council during President George Herbert Walker Bush's administration, President 41 Bush, as they like to describe him. Now back here in New York, as you can see behind me, the billowing smoke, the continuing dust and debris from the collapse of the World Trade Center earlier today, and then Trade Center number 7, a 40-story building that went down. But the World Trade Center, one of the targets of the terrorists today, is one of the most distinctive architectural edifices in the world. The world's largest commercial complex, completed in 1976, an architectural marvel, its details immense. A massive twin structure, 110 stories tall, built of 600,000 square feet of glass and 200,000 tons of steel, 1,350 feet tall, 43,000 windows, 99 elevators, and a home for 1,200 businesses. Businesses where 50,000 people work. Businesses that include commodity exchanges, investment firms, law firms, banks, restaurants, a hotel, government offices, a top and observation deck, a renowned tourist attraction. The Trade Center could draw 90,000 additional visitors on a busy day. Today, the Twin Towers, many of those inside, gone. That's just one of the many reasons, of course, that today will be remembered as one of the worst days in the nearly 400-year history of the great city of New York. And NBC's Pat Dawson has been on the streets of New York, very near the World Trade Center throughout most of the day. He's been witness to the heroic rescue efforts that were effected there today. And of course, tonight, Pat, still an unknown number of dead trapped there in the rubble.
It's very true, Tom. Police, fire, and emergency workers first on the scene this morning knew they had a catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. What they didn't realize is that after they arrived, it would get worse, and that many of them would be victims as well. Within minutes of the attack, New York rescue crews responded. Dozens of emergency workers running headlong into the chaos, a swirling mass of fire and smoke more than 60 stories up. Chief Albert Turry of the New York Fire Department was one of the first on the scene.
The initial reaction was that it was an absolute terrorist attack.
His job, direct a rescue effort inside the Trade Center. His team of 200 firefighters fanned out into the burning towers to search for survivors.
When that first tower fell, I was trying to evacuate everybody 3 blocks north, away from every high-rise building in the area.
But when the towers started crumbling, crashing all around them, the original rescue effort became an exercise in survival, the rescuers themselves running for their lives.
But I'm telling you right now, there wasn't time to evacuate our people.
Most of those that did make it out of the Trade Center covered in debris, ghostly figures coughing and vomiting from the smoke and dust.
It was the most horrific scene I've ever seen in my whole life. We saw the World Trade Center in flames, a big gaping hole all the way on the top of it. We could see people jumping from the top of the building.
At midday, the financial district of Lower Manhattan looks like a war zone. With no idea if another attack is imminent, hundreds of companies throughout New York send their workers home. Bridges and tunnels across the Hudson River are closed. Mass transit shut down.
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago. The governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon. But right now they don't want to leave because they're searching for innocent citizens, and they're searching for some of their brothers and sisters.
When rescuers finally got inside the trade towers, the damage left many of them shocked at the near total devastation. There's no way to estimate casualties. Thousands are believed dead. For those used to saving lives, the frustration is overwhelming.
When you start talking to a New York police officer and they start crying for what they've seen in the last couple hours, you know the seriousness and the gravity of the situation.
Throughout the day, rescuers have faced a terrible choice with hundreds, perhaps thousands of people trapped in the rubble in there, When is it safe to go back in? And Tom, the most vivid example of that, referred to by David Bloom a little while ago, that, of course, the loss of Building 7 of the World Trade Center just over my shoulder, which tumbled to the ground 8 hours after this attack began. Tom?
NBC's Pat Dawson in Lower Manhattan tonight. And, of course, for many of the people who lived through all of that, it will be one of the unforgettable moments of their lives. NBC's Ann Thompson was in the vicinity of the World Trade Center when the buildings began to come down. Ann?
Tom, this is the view tonight down West Broadway. Smoke's filling the air where the two towers in building number 7 stood. In the last hour, we have seen busloads of police, of doctors, and ambulance after ambulance go into that area to try to repair a city that's been mortally wounded by this attack. A direct hit that shattered New York City's confidence.
Well, as soon as the first building collapsed, everybody made a mad dash to just take cover.
And everybody just started running. I just happened to duck right into the post office.
As soon as we got out of the train station, people were screaming and crying and yelling, and it was just total chaos, and the bottom of our building was blown out.
For me, Ground Zero, Fulton and Broadway, about 2 blocks from the World Trade Center, just as the South Tower crumbled. Hollywood could never imagine something like this. A tidal wave of smoke and debris came roaring down Broadway. I was standing at the corner of Fulton and Broadway. I ran into a building, ran between a column and a building at 195 Broadway, and pushed my face and my body into that building. For what seemed like 5 minutes, I was pelted with all kinds of debris. I crouched down, was coughing, trying to breathe. You couldn't get any air. The air was so full of smoke and dust. When it finally settled, I stood up. My glasses were covered with dust. Hours later, I'm still covered with dust. The building that I was in front of, 195 Broadway, the doors were gated shut. They opened the doors, let us in, and inside we were finally able to breathe. It wasn't easy. My eyes were filled with dust. My mouth was filled with dust. I was choking. The people I was with were choking. It was just absolutely horrific. All I could think of was, this is war.
I just heard the rumble, and then I ran like hell, and there was a large wind coming.
Down here, panic. Survivors flee by whatever means they can, fearing more destruction at any moment. At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble and more smoke and more dust. I ran inside the buildings, the chandelier shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
Everyone, please clear the corner.
Palpable fear as people run through the streets, choking on dust and debris.
You gotta chase it. Come on, let's go, let's go.
We saw the building come down. We all ran, and the walkway held up to save like 40 or 50 of us that were right there. We were buried there, and then cops shot out windows in the next building. It was the only thing that was in front of us was like these 1-inch windows.
The streets of the financial district covered with debris, in some cases ankle deep. Cars on fire, cars just turned by the force of the explosions. It was like something no one had ever seen. Panic, like smoke, heads uptown. Officials ordering precautionary evacuations of some of New York City's landmarks.
This is an orderly evacuation of 30 Rockefeller Plaza.
On the street, anxious commuters trying to call home, cell phone service dead. At Grand Central Station, travelers desperate to get out of the city.
It's going to take a long time, but you're going to see Mama and Papa today, okay?
Outside the station, a surreal scene. People buying postcards of the Twin Towers that no longer exist. As the day wears on, witnesses who survived the attack now face a new horror, searching for missing friends and co-workers.
We can't account for all of our employees. We're just in a state of shock.
The biggest, busiest city in the world, the attack revives fears of the 1993 bombing. Suddenly, nowhere in the financial district seems safe. Did you ever think this could happen again?
No, I really didn't. I lived through the first one.
After a tragedy so great, tonight a city comes together, searching for safety and comfort. Tom, now this area is more than just a business district. It is also where people live. And within the last hour, we have seen families bringing suitcases, crates carrying their family pets to leave and to go elsewhere. They have no water, they have no gas, and there is also the fear that more buildings will collapse. The area is covered by police from all over New York City, and they tell us that they will be here through the night. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Ann Thompson. But let me ask you, after you finally emerged from that building, what about other people who could not get into a building? What kind of casualties did you see?
Tom, I will tell you that when I walked out of the building on Broadway and headed down towards Canal, it was as if there had been a blizzard of debris and dust all over the street. I saw people running. I was walking. There were a lot of rescue people there, but there were people injured. I saw a woman being carried by two men. It was like something I had never seen anything like it, and all I could think of was just to get away from there, to get to safety. And as I kept walking to Canal Street, I could hear yet another explosion behind me. It was truly one of the most frightening moments I've ever lived through.
Thanks very much, NBC's Ann Thompson. Any number of NBC News personnel were caught in all of that today. Among them, our producer Mary Beth O'Toole and correspondent Rahema Ellis. And they provided us tonight with a kind of a video diary. We'd like to share that with you now. Well, we'll hope to get back to Rahema Ellis. Obviously, we're having some difficulty with what has been going on with the audio part of our broadcast tonight in that particular videotape. This is a live picture looking across New York Harbor, and I'll ask your forbearance and patience here because we are doing the very best we can under, as you might expect, some very trying circumstances. That's looking across from the other side, from the New Jersey side, at the lower end of Manhattan. That is a picture that has been going on all day, but when it began, there were the two 110-story towers of the World Trade Center. They are now gone from the Manhattan skyline. It's still a stunning thought to realize that they have been brought down so coldly and so efficiently in such a cold-blooded fashion by these hijacked airliners in this terrorist attack. Another colleague who captured some of the most horrifying moments today is Christian Martin. He's a native New Yorker and he's a producer at Dateline. He had his own camera with him when the buildings began to come down.
And I saw a tourist with a video camera, so I said, let me buy that from you. I took a shot of a huge wheel of a plane lying in the middle of the avenue. There was all these sort of white sheets in the middle of the street, which took me a minute to figure out what those were. I mean, the collapse happened 10 minutes after I got the camera. I shot a couple of shots of the building burning. I was shooting the building, and the building started to collapse, and that happens pretty slowly. Everyone gets into the job for adventure. This turned sour pretty fast. I was down in Oklahoma City, and I got there about 4 hours afterwards, and that was pretty chaotic. This was about 1,000 times worse and more chaotic than that. And then, the cop was like, run, to save my life. I had literally a mouthful of soot. You couldn't see. It was just... And then people were just remarkable. I mean, everyone was just in a horrible, horrible place. You couldn't see. Everyone was hurt. I was so lucky. So lucky. So much luckier than so many other people. I mean, you just cannot overemphasize how many completely innocent, beautiful people were just, destroyed by this.
One of our producers, Christian Bernard, tonight, in his own words, he was there in the middle of it. Christian Martin is a producer for Dateline. He managed to buy a camera from a tourist and then almost lost his life as he was trying to record what was going on down there. We want to tell you that momentarily we do expect to hear from the Attorney General of the United States, John Ashcroft, who does have supervisory responsibility for the FBI. He's our chief law enforcement officer. And also from the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tommy Thompson, the former governor of Wisconsin. He'll be dealing with a lot of the relief that is going on. Behind me, you can see the dusk is now beginning to settle over the city of New York, and the billowing smoke is still emanating from the lower part of Manhattan, the site of what was once two towers, each 110 stories high. 20,000 people, we believe, are in them at that time when they were attacked today. And the 40-story 7 Trade Center now missing from the Manhattan skyline. We're going to see if we can't get Rahema Ellis back. She was with Mary Beth O'Toole today. They had a kind of a video diary. So let's join that now. We may have to come out of it as we go to Attorney General Ashcroft. But let's hear from Rahema.
New York City's Brooklyn Bridge, normally clogged with vehicles, today an escape route. It's 11:45 in the morning, and there is a mass exodus from downtown New York City. You can take a look, and you can see hundreds of thousands of people leaving the area.
These heinous acts of violence are an assault on the security of our nation. They are an assault on the security and the freedom of every American citizen. We will not tolerate such acts. We will expend every effort and devote all the necessary resources to bring the people responsible for these acts, these crimes, to justice. Now is the time for us to come together as a nation to offer our support, our prayers for victims and for their families, for the rescue workers, for law enforcement officials, for every one of us that has been changed forever by this horrible tragedy. The following is a summary of the known facts surrounding today's incidents. American Airlines Flight 11 departed Boston for Los Angeles, hijacked by suspects armed with knives. This plane crashed into the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 175 departed Boston for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77 departed Washington Dulles for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 93 departed Newark for San Francisco, was hijacked and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Crime scenes have been established by the federal authorities in New York, in Washington, D.C. area, in Pittsburgh, in Boston, and in Newark. The full resources of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Bureau of Prisons, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Office of Justice Programs are being deployed to investigate these crimes and to assist survivors and victim families. Thousands of FBI agents in all of the field offices across the country and in the international Legat offices, assisted by personnel from other Department of Justice agencies, are cooperating in this investigation. The FBI has established a website where people can report any information about these crimes. That address is www.ifccfbi.gov. That address again, www.ifccfbi.gov. Individuals can report any information they know about these crimes to that website. It takes courage for individuals to come forward in situations like this, and I urge anyone with information that may be useful and helpful to authorities to use this opportunity. The Office of Victims of Crime has established a toll-free 800 number for family and friends of victims. They can call 800-331-0075 to leave contact information for a future time when more information is available, to find out information about a victim, or to find out information about the rights of victims and the services available to victim survivors and victim families. The determination of these terrorists will not deter the determination of the American people. We are survivors, and freedom is a survivor. A free American people will not be intimidated, nor will we be defeated. We will find the people responsible for these cowardly acts, and justice will be done. Tommy.
Every single American lost something today. And every one of us at this time expresses our deepest sympathy to the victims of today's tragedies and their families. It is now our mission to begin the healing from this tragedy. From the moment that we learned of these attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services has begun readying teams and resources to be sent to New York City and the Washington area to meet any needs of state and local officials. So far, we have sent 4 disaster medical teams to New York City and 3 of these disaster medical teams to the Washington, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area. These medical teams each consist of about 35 physicians, nurses, and emergency medical technicians. They are all trained to deal with traumatic injuries and other emergency needs. We've also sent 4 disaster mortuary operational response teams to New York and 3 to the greater Washington area. We're also in the process of shipping a great deal of emergency medical supplies to New York City with the help of the Centers for Disease Control. In short, we're making the full force of the Department of Health and Human Services, both its resources and medical expertise available to the areas that need our assistance. We've also this afternoon activated the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, which consists of approximately 6,000 health professionals. We also are giving backup assistance to the 500-bed ship Comfort from the United States Navy. Americans all over are calling up and asking what they can do. The best thing they can do is respond to this great call by volunteering to give blood. We need Americans to continue to answer that call. No matter where you live, please do your civic duty and assist us by donating blood. It is our primary job is to make sure Americans harmed by this tragedy get the help that they need. We will remain in constant contact with the governors, the mayors, public health officials, and other local officials to make sure that all their needs are being met. It is a sad day, but America and all of its citizens certainly share tonight in the grief that has been caused. And as the President and everybody in his administration have said, we, the government, will continue to operate and continue to provide the services to all Americans.
Secretary of Health and Human Services Tommy Thompson with John Ashcroft, who is the Attorney General of the United States, talking about the role of the federal government now in tracking down those people who are responsible for today's attacks, and then the process of healing physically and psychologically and politically this country. Big part of the story today, the medical response. Witnesses kept saying the scene today was like a war zone. In fact, one of the rescue workers said, "I spent a year in combat. I never saw anything quite like all of this." New York area has first-rate medical facilities, and many of them, and NBC's Robert Bazell was at one of them today, and he joins us now. Robert?
Tom, within minutes of the first explosion, thousands of doctors and nurses at hundreds of hospitals around the New York City area responded with emergency plans to the biggest medical crisis this city has ever faced. At the scene of the explosions and building collapse, emergency workers set up triage sites to put the dead aside and move the most critically wounded to area hospitals. The closest trauma center to the World Trade Center is St. Vincent's in New York's Greenwich Village. A steady stream of ambulances began minutes after the explosion and continued through the day with many kinds of injuries.
Several fractures, several patients have already been to the operating room, and because of the intense fire and smoke, multiple patients with inhalation injuries, and they're being monitored in critical care units.
Medical staff stood prepared to meet each ambulance, some carrying many injured. This one hospital sent out a call for blood donors, and within minutes, so many volunteers appeared that the hospital was swamped and arranged for buses to take donors to other hospitals.
What if you know you just owe and you're not sure whether you're negative or positive?
More than 400 casualties were taken across the Hudson River to hospitals in New Jersey and Staten Island.
What next? Oh my God.
Among the first casualties, about 1 in 5 were rescue workers, firefighters, police, and EMS technicians involved in the rescue effort. Many of the rescuers, hardened by years of tragedies, said they had never seen anything as bad.
Day turned into night for about 2 or 3 minutes, and took an inventory of myself and went about.
As of late this evening, the total number of casualties taken to all area hospitals stands near 1,000. And that number is very low because rescue workers expect that there are still thousands of people buried underneath all of that rubble. And all of the doctors and nurses expect that they are going to be treating casualties from the rubble for several days to come. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Robert Bazell tonight. Now let's go back to Washington. It was the scene of the third hit, of course, a direct hit on the emblem of American military power, the Pentagon, the headquarters for our military services. An estimated 100 casualties there on the ground. 64 were on the plane that hit it, including a prominent Washington lawyer. NBC's Jim Miklaszewski. Well, before we get to that, we're going to go to the congressional leadership. Jim, if you'll just stand by at the Pentagon, Jim Miklaszewski will be coming back to you momentarily. Let's go now to the Hill, and Tom Daschle is the Senate Majority Leader.
To justice. We, Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, stand strongly united behind the President and will work together to ensure that the full resources of the government are brought to bear in these efforts. Our heartfelt thoughts and our fervent prayers are with the injured and the families of those who have been lost.
Now, House Speaker Dennis Hastert, who's third in line in succession.
We know, as a nation, as we said, our thoughts and prayers are with those families and those injured and those who are the casualties of today's attack. We also remember those thousands of people who are rescue workers. We ask now that we all bow our heads in a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you.
A rare and welcome bipartisan gathering of the Republican and Democratic leadership of the United States Senate and the House of Representatives.
This is wild.
On the steps of the U.S. Capitol, men and women, black, white and Asian, conservatives and liberals and independents from all corners of this country, a spontaneous demonstration of unity, a declaration of support for the President of the United States, and a very important symbolic message to be sending around the world and to this country at this hour. NBC's Tim Russert is our Washington bureau chief. Tim, Washington has been riven in recent years by petty political divisions, but this is bound to have a big impact on the ability of Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, to say nothing of the other political players in this country, to find common ground.
Tom, the rancor and partisanship in Washington disappeared immediately. Such national unity as just demonstrated in the steps of the Capitol. Remember, 24 hours ago, it was the Bush tax cut, the Bush budget, the Bush economy. You don't hear any of that tonight. It's America's enemy. America's under attack. Tomorrow, the Congress will convene. Almost an act of defiance, saying, we are here standing strong, Democrats and Republicans arm in arm. It's a very, very important message, not only for the world and the terrorists, but for our own nation as well. And it's quite welcome, frankly, by many people who've been covering a Congress constantly bickering with one another almost every issue. Tonight, they have found, in a very tragic way, a common bond because out of the necessity of protecting our country and our values.
Thanks very much, NBC's Tim Russert. Every generation of politicians has, in its own way, Tim, a test of its steel and its strength and its long view for this country. But I think that it's worth also pointing out that whatever happens in Washington in the next several days, that America is going to be changed by the events of this day. Let's go to NBC Jim Miklaszewski now, who is at the Pentagon, across the river, of course, from the nation's capital. He was there in his office this morning when he heard an explosion and told us immediately he didn't know for sure what it was. We later learned, of course, Jim, it was the unthinkable, a hijacked airliner that had crashed into that building.
Back here, fresh flames are flickering from the roof of the building. Rescue workers continue to search the bombed-out portion of the Pentagon. It's believed that scores of dead are still buried beneath the rubble. No exact death toll has been yet released here, but a temporary morgue has been set up at the courtyard at the center of the Pentagon complex. And the dead. This was the second target in a well-coordinated act of terrorism. At 9:15, after the second plane hits the World Trade Center, the Pentagon puts together a crisis action team to assess any additional threats. 9:30, American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757 with 62 people on board, takes off from Dulles Airport for Los Angeles. Believed hijacked, it heads instead for the Pentagon. 9:38. Flying low alongside the Pentagon, it banks sharply 90 degrees, flips on its right side, and slams into the Pentagon's lower two floors on the southwest side, exploding on impact as horrified commuters watch.
I saw a plane going down, big plane, commercial liner type, going down full speed and just inside the side of the Pentagon.
Panicked employees evacuate by the thousands. The plane slices deep into the lower Pentagon, leaving a gaping black hole of destruction. The upper floors later collapse, burying hopes any more survivors will be found alive. At the opposite end of the Pentagon, well out of harm's way, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was at his desk.
Secretary Rumsfeld was in his office at the time the plane hit the Pentagon and proceeded down towards the impact point in the building. It actually went outside the building and was helpful in getting several people that were injured onto stretchers.
It was 4 hours before the fire is brought under control and rescuers enter the building in search of more dead or possible injured. In a scene straight out of a war zone, F-16s, scrambled by the National Guard, fly cover over the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. But the attacks appear over, the unspeakable deed done. And a short time ago, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Hugh Shelton, expressed America's resolve with a firm pledge to retaliate against those responsible, the number one suspect, Osama bin Laden. Now, the military has always had contingency plans for attacks against a variety of bin Laden targets. Behind me and what's left of this building here tonight, the military is literally dusting off those plans. Tom?
NBC's Jim Miklaszewski. Jim, around the world, American military forces still on the highest status of alert?
The highest state of alert, Delta. And a short time after that, military commanders all around the world took the responsibility, went to Delta, which puts those forces on a virtual war footing, prepared for anything.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Jim Miklaszewski at the Pentagon tonight. As New York was a target and thrown into chaos in Los Angeles, it was a city stunned by the attack and the fact that 3 of the 4 hijacked airliners were bound for Los Angeles, the other for San Francisco, California. NBC's George Lewis is at Los Angeles International Airport tonight with some of the grieving families and the latest on some of the crash victims that we know about. George?
Yes, Tom, a lot of grieving going on here on the West Coast because all of the people who were lost on those planes were bound for California. Ordinarily, Los Angeles International has 2,100 flights daily, but tonight the airport's completely buttoned up, nothing taking off or landing.
Please.
Shocked and grief-stricken, the relatives of those aboard the hijacked flights rushed to the airport, where authorities quickly took them to private rooms. Grief counselors from the Salvation Army joined airline personnel in trying to comfort the families of the passengers.
It's just to be there and to say to them, we are here and we'll do whatever we can do to help you through this trauma and this pain.
The first plane to crash into the World Trade Center, American Airlines Flight 11, was bound from Boston to Los Angeles, piloted by 52-year-old John Oganowski. This afternoon, his brother spoke to reporters.
I ask all of you for your prayers. For as I refer to him as Brother John. And I ask you to also pray for our whole country today.
Among the well-known passengers on the hijacked planes, the producer of the TV series Frasier, David Angel, and CNN commentator Barbara Olson, wife of U.S. Solicitor General Ted Olson. She reportedly called her husband twice on a mobile phone to tell him her plane was being hijacked, that the crew and all the passengers were being herded to the back of the aircraft. And on United Flight 93 from Washington to San Francisco, one of the flight attendants, C.C. Myers, also used a cell phone to report that hijacking to her husband, a policeman in Fort Myers, Florida. By midday in Los Angeles, FBI personnel were swarming over the airport checking for possible bombs, but none were found. As a precaution, police and the FBI ordered the airport evacuated.
We're evacuating all terminals and we're stopping traffic all over.
An eerie scene at Los Angeles International tonight, the airport completely empty. And why were all of the hijacked planes California bound? One theory is that the hijackers deliberately chose planes that would have been fully loaded with fuel for a transcontinental flight. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's George Lewis tonight. Now let's go to the reaction around the rest of the country. This day of terror rippling from coast to coast. NBC's Jim Avila is at the Sears Tower in downtown Chicago. Jim?
Tom, Chicago's skyline intact but virtually empty tonight as America's skyscrapers were evacuated through most of the day today. That includes Chicago's Sears Tower, the Arco Towers in Los Angeles, the Bank of America in San Francisco, all waiting for the all clear. The nation's landmarks, America's gathering spots, today abandoned as potential terrorist targets, from the Seattle Space Needle and LA City Hall in the west, to Disney World in the southeast, to the world's biggest shopping mall, the Mall of America in Minneapolis, closed. And of course, at the country's tallest building, Sears Tower, and Michigan Avenue in the Midwest, the symbols of American life frozen in fear.
It's scary. Your family's away from home, your kids at school, so it's very scary.
America hunkered down, Chicago's financial district virtually empty. Every sworn police officer in the third largest city ordered to the streets. The nation's workforce turning around and heading home. Larry Hudson works at the Sears Tower.
And I got to the elevator, I said, hey, what am I going up for?
Kelly and David McLean split up to go to work this morning and quickly decided home in front of the television set was the safest spot today.
Now this nation has turned, it's turned upside down.
emotionally, perhaps financially, who knows? It's absolutely, it's one of those moments that you can't believe you actually saw played out.
At America's 5,000 airports, total shutdown.
Ground stop for all airports until 1 o'clock. That means that no airplanes will be leaving any of the airports in the United States.
An estimated 200,000 passengers stranded. At O'Hare, world's busiest, a line of jets held on the runway for hours. No open gates, but surprisingly few complaints.
Being upset about missing my plane, that's trivial compared to people that were on the plane and in the buildings.
Military planes like this one in San Francisco escorting the last of the commercial jetliners safely to the ground. But a crippled air travel system is more than inconvenience. Aviation expert Mike Boyd.
Air transportation is part of our communication system. Today, it's shut down entirely. People aren't moving A to B. Goods aren't moving. Mail isn't moving. And because of that, we're probably going to have a tens of billions of dollar hit on our economy for this quarter.
Phone service strangled too. America's largest cell phone network, with cell towers atop the World Trade Center destroyed, reports call volume nationally doubled.
We can't compare today's events to anything that we've experienced before. We've withstood earthquakes, hurricanes, significant floods, but nothing like today's event.
Get to 12 extra right here.
In Chicago, 800 miles from the attacks, Karen Davis frustrated in her attempt to work at home.
I could not get a signal on my way home, and then I couldn't get a signal on my home phone when I got here. Just really frustrating not to be able to get in contact with anybody.
Among the events canceled tonight, Major League Baseball postponing games from coast to coast. NBC's Tonight Show called off, and the Emmys, scheduled for Sunday, canceled too.
We all could see the gravity of the situation and realize this is a true national nightmare come true, and that a celebration and a comedy show would just not be something that would be appropriate for this country this weekend.
We cannot let it happen again.
Most of the nation's schools stayed open through the tragic day, students watching terrorism on their own shores for the first time.
And I just was asking myself over and over why they did this.
Teachers trying to make sense of it.
There are other places in the world where this is commonplace, and for us it's a first.
At this hospital in suburban Chicago, Americans responding by lining up to donate blood. Midday church services more crowded than normal.
I guess I'm just looking for a peace in my heart and for peace in other people's hearts and from all the destruction.
Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave?
At SMU in Dallas, older students sing the national anthem at an outdoor rally, mixing tears and patriotism. Experts say Americans should expect a jump in the national anxiety level.
They may be irritable, they may be really very acutely aware of their environment around them and any kind of threats to them.
Also tonight, some of the first effects of the fear in the economic fashion. Already today, there's been problems with gas gouging. In fact, gas prices have gone up in Kansas to as much as $5 a gallon. Tom?
NBC Jim Avila tonight reporting on the length and breadth of this country from Chicago, the heartland of America. Told now we have a tracking tape. It shows the pattern of the flight that went into the first of the twin trade towers. It took off from Boston. That would be Flight 11 American Airlines. And then you can see that sharp left turn as it heads for New York, well off course. And the second plane headed now going from New York, and then this is the second one that comes into New York. The second one goes from Newark to Pennsylvania, where it went down. There's still some uncertainty about whether that was going to be directed by the hijackers into one of the other many government or financial buildings that could have been a target for it, either in the Washington, D.C. or New York area. We don't know for sure. Of course, for many Americans tonight, the anger and the rage that they feel is directed at one man that they have never seen except on some vague videotape. Osama bin Laden, the world's best-known Islamic extremist. He's on almost everyone's list of the most likely suspects for today's attacks, and NBC's Keith Miller has more on him tonight from London for us. Keith?
Tom, he is one of the most dangerous terrorists on the planet. The U.S. government has put a $5 million bounty on his head. Osama bin Laden was last seen publicly this January at his son's wedding in Afghanistan. Rare pictures of a man who reportedly travels only at night, often in disguise, surrounded by bodyguards. He made his reputation in the 1980s, fighting the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan.
He was involved in some horrific battles, which he said later gave him a sort of tranquility and a sense of peace, and it basically made him a pretty fearless guy.
Today, the Central Intelligence Agency calls him the most immediate and serious threat to U.S. security. Bin Laden says the jihad against the United States and killing of Americans is the core of his faith. He was born into a family of wealth, power, and privilege in Saudi Arabia 44 years ago. It was during his days as a student studying economics that he turned to radical Islam. He is linked to a series of global terrorist attacks. February 1993, the bombing of the World Trade Center in New York, 6 dead, more than 1,000 injured. August 7, 1998, the simultaneous U.S. embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, more than 200 killed. And last year, the suicide bomb attack on the USS Cole, resulting in the death of 17 American servicemen.
He alone, probably within the Islamic world, has amassed and developed a terrorist network, an international network, which will be capable of carrying out such an atrocity.
After the embassy bombing, the American government retaliated with missile strikes. The missiles damaged bin Laden's headquarters in Afghanistan, but he escaped unharmed. The U.S. has demanded that the radical Islamic government in Afghanistan hand bin Laden over to American authorities. But the Afghans have refused, despite bin Laden's declaration that all U.S. citizens are legitimate targets.
He's targeted the US because he sees America as the head of the snake, as he calls it. The body of the snake is the corrupt governments in the Middle East that he has promised to overthrow, and also Israel.
Meanwhile, his popularity in the region is reportedly increasing. Recently, an estimated 25,000 followers scattered around the world and prepared to engage in a holy war against America. From Afghanistan tonight, a statement from the government claiming bin Laden didn't do it. Meanwhile, U.S. intelligence officials say he was last seen near Jalalabad in eastern Afghanistan, but because he moves at least 3 times a week, he will remain difficult to catch. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Keith Miller tonight. We want to give you an update now. The President of the United States will be addressing this nation on this difficult day at 8:30 Eastern Time tonight. And, of course, we will bring that to you live. There are people around the world who do not wish America well. We know that as a result of today's attacks, but also on the basis of their reaction to what happened here today. Some of them are even celebrating. With that story, here's NBC's Martin Fletcher in Tel Aviv. Martin?
Tom, Israel is declaring a day of mourning tomorrow in solidarity with the United States, but not all reaction here has been so sympathetic. There's a sense here among some Palestinians that America had it coming. These Palestinians in East Jerusalem today delighted at the bombings and American loss of life, offering cakes and sweets, calling out, "God is great." Thousands more celebrate in other West Bank towns until Palestinian police disperse them. The Palestinian leader, however, stunned and sympathetic.
We are completely shocked. Completely shocked. Unbelievable.
But the voice of the street reflects anger at America's role, especially in Israel and Iraq.
We should show America that they should learn and they should know what is to attack somebody like Iraq. It should be more.
And many Arabs furious at American support for Israel. This man holds up an American-made bomb part fired by American-made aircraft used by Israel. American support for Israel, some believe, makes America a legitimate target for terrorism. Many also angry at years of almost daily American bomb attacks against Iraq, which didn't stop with the end of the Gulf War a decade ago. And US troops still in Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden, the prime suspect in today's terror attacks, angry at American support for what he calls a tyrannical government of Saudi Arabia, his homeland, and for America's close ties with Israel. In almost a year of unrest, more than a dozen Palestinian suicide bombers and other attackers have killed 170 Israelis, while Israel has killed more than 570 Palestinians. A conflict that always threatens to suck neighbouring countries into the fighting. Israel tonight called for an international war against terrorism.
The fight against terror is an international struggle of the free world against the forces of darkness who seek to destroy our liberty and our way of life.
Today, the leader of Hamas, the Islamic militants who send most suicide bombers against Israel, called on America to change its policies. Sheikh Yassin said America is behind injustices in many parts of the world, but then he said Hamas doesn't support attacks against civilians. Tonight, Israel closed its airspace to foreign airlines and then closed its land borders to prevent any possible terrorist attacks. There's a sense here that Palestinian militants may try to take advantage of the confusion to kill more Israelis. Tom?
Thank you very much, NBC's Martin Fletcher. An already very complex and volatile situation in the Middle East is even more so tonight. Now to a different kind of problem. The World Trade Center towers were some of the most famous buildings in the world, of course. They've survived hurricanes, fires, and even one previous terrorist bombing. NBC's Roger O'Neill talked to the architect of those buildings and how they were put up and what brought them down.
Hyman Brown was the project engineer on the Twin Towers, the man on the ground in charge of making sure the buildings were built right, the way it was designed.
There was a lot of pride in it, and we were doing something that hadn't been done before. But no one ever considered any types of forces like this.
Brown, who spent 6 years building the towers from day one in 1966, says the planes didn't cause the towers to collapse, but rather the fire and tremendous heat that exposed the steel superstructure to forces it could not withstand.
Structural steel is fireproof to last between 1 and 2 hours, which it did, and then steel melts.
Each tower was built around a central core. That core kept the building up, supporting the tower's so-called dead weight. But when steel melts, according to Brown, like dominoes, it falls. Brown says the towers were built to withstand 200-mile-an-hour hurricanes, the 100-year storm, the worst nature could dish out. But he says an airplane crash never entered anyone's mind. Still, it appears the outside columns, made of prefabricated steel, absorbed most of the energy from the planes and may have kept the two towers from collapsing immediately. University of Colorado engineering professor Stein Stur thinks the energy from those large planes would be equivalent to a medium 5 or 6 Richter scale earthquake.
As the airplanes came in and hit, energy was absorbed tremendously. Some of that core may have been damaged tremendously, and maybe this was part cause to this implosion.
The way the towers collapsed seems similar to pictures we've become accustomed to watching, as old buildings like the Kingdome in Seattle are taken down with explosives. Mark Loazza, whose controlled demolition company does that sort of work, says once a building starts falling, it releases a lot of stored energy.
We use explosives as a catalyst to release that potential energy, converts it into kinetic energy, gets the building moving.
NBC's Roger O'Neill tonight on the stunning destruction of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center here in Manhattan as a result of a terrorist attack. All hour long, we've been trying to bring you Rahema Ellis and her diary of what she went through during the day, and we're going to do that for you right now.
New York City's Brooklyn Bridge, normally clogged with vehicles, today an escape route. It's 11:45 in the morning, and there is a mass exodus from downtown New York City. You can take a look, and you can see hundreds of thousands of people leaving the area. Police are evacuating this particular area. Were you afraid for your life?
Completely terrified. We were all crying, hysterical. We were wanting to get out of there and not knowing where to go and which direction to run in and how far we can go. And I'm still worried about my life. Yeah, it's horrifying.
Another sign of how quickly people deserted the area. This is a fruit stand only about 8 to 10 blocks away from the World Trade Center. Normally there would be people crowded in the streets trying to buy some fruit from a man who may have worked here. Now it's deserted. Nothing is left but his fruit covered in ash. What went through your head when you saw that?
Still completely devastated, completely.
Devastation.
People jumped out of the windows. It was indescribable.
I'm watching the thing, and all of a sudden it starts crashing, this tremendous noise, and instinct obviously tells you to turn the other way and run, which we all did. People were getting trampled and bleeding.
We're now just a block away from the World Trade Center, and the closer we get to ground zero, the harder it is to breathe and to see. You have to wear a mask, and you need to wear some sort of glasses. Otherwise, it is choking and blinding smoke. Behind me, ordinarily you would be able to see the Twin Towers, but today all you can see is the thick black smoke that is clouding the area. All on the street there is this thick ash. It's at least an inch thick. There are paper strewn all over everywhere. And the area literally is deserted, with the exception of the emergency workers who are continually trying to push people away from the area for their own safety. What do you think this is?
I have no idea.
But your guess is?
Pulverized cement.
Pulverized cement?
Concrete, yeah.
The concrete. These firefighters, just some of the hundreds, waiting for their turn to go into the World Trade Center area. Already they are covered in soot, tired, and worried about what they're going to see when they get to ground zero.
What happened to you?
I was inside the building trying to get people out when the building fell.
When do you think that we will be able to begin to go in and start to really search for some of the victims inside?
They're searching right now on a limited basis. As soon as they get organized, we'll be sending more and more people in to do more and more work.
NYU Downtown Hospital has the only emergency room in Lower Manhattan. The first victims from the blast were brought here. The cafeteria has been turned into a triage area. Hospital officials say there are victims wall to wall. 8 years ago, this hospital took in the first victims from the World Trade Center bombing. Officials here say they try to plan for disasters. 2 weeks ago, they went through an emergency drill, but no one ever imagined they'd be tested so soon. Rahima Ellis, NBC News in Lower Manhattan.
NBC's Rahima Ellis, who was in the middle of it all. We want to remind you that we'll have continuing coverage until 1 tomorrow morning on this NBC station. The President of the United States, his speech to the nation at 8:30 Eastern Time tonight. It has now been about 11 hours since the first attack on the Twin Trade Towers and the stunning sequence of events that followed. It all happened so rapidly and in plain view that it somehow seemed surreal, more a television image than the cold-blooded, calculated acts of terrorism that in fact it was. This is a day without end, for we do not know yet the full price in lives lost, whether there are other targets to come, and most important, how we will respond to this terrorist attack, how we strike back militarily, how we defend ourselves at home, how we heal all the wounds of this day. America has been attacked, and it has been changed. This is the first great test of the new century for this nation, for its new president. It's also a great test for us all, wherever we live, whatever our age, whatever our beliefs. Tonight, as we remind you, we'll have continuing coverage. We want to share with you now the images and the sounds of this unforgettably dark day in America.